Okay, guys, it's been a pretty long day, but I hope that we have saved an interesting topic for the last session for the day, and that's to deal with the very difficult problem of addressing coal transition, especially here in Southeast Asia. Now, I want to move very quickly on because we are running short of time. So first, Nat, I want to turn to you. Now, you have been working on this issue around energy transition for quite a bit. And now you're responsible for the Kinetic Coalition that is pulling together buyers that are perhaps interested in participating and supporting the coal transition. May I just ask you to perhaps share with us what's keeping you awake when at night when it comes to the state of energy transition in the world? And could you also comment on the importance of addressing energy transition here in Asia?
Yeah, sure. And thanks so much, Fred, and thanks to GenZero for this great event all afternoon and for this panel. I mean, I think just three quick points, and probably familiar to everybody in the room. One is just you can't solve climate change. We can't address the climate crisis without addressing the clean energy transition, specifically in Asia. I think Ravi had a quote, had a stat. I have a complementary stat. According to the IEA, one of every 4 tons of CO2, just CO2,
from coal plants
in Asia Pacific. Now, a lot of that, of course, is in China, but a lot of that is outside of China. And so we have to address that issue, and we have to accelerate that transition if we're going to solve climate. But we also have to make sure that we're providing energy access, energy services to people as we do that, and that we're growing energy demand. So that's the first core piece. The second piece is we can't do that without finance. And here again, IEA, there's the $1 trillion figure, but even if you just look at Southeast Asia, that's $100 billion annually, give or take, just on power systems, grid systems, another 60 to 80 outside of India and China, outside of Southeast Asia. So massive amounts of finance. There's no one single solution, obviously. We've heard about layered finance, blended finance, but carbon credits and transition credits can be part of that solution simply because it's a very flexible source of finance that can catalyze and leverage additional pieces. And then the final thing I would say is, when we think about the transition, we need to think holistically about it. So when we think about how to accelerate the clean energy transition, the heart of that is going to be transitioning away from coal plants and early retirement of coal and making sure we do that in a way that's just and meets the needs of communities. But it's also going to require investing in renewables and other zero carbon generation to replace that and indeed to meet growing energy demand. It means investing in grid, transmission, distribution, and so on. And it means investing in the communities. So you need a holistic approach to thinking about this.
I think we are always clearer about what we need to transition away from, a little bit less clear about what we are transitioning to. And I think, when we are thinking about this topic, oftentimes at a high level, of course, we know that we need to move into clean transition. But the issues are always particularly local, particularly regional, because there are local and regional national context to this. So we're delighted today to be joined by Commissioner Albert from the Philippines. And maybe, Commissioner, you can share with us a little bit around why Philippines is actually engaged in this particular coal transition conversation.
Yes, thank you. First and foremost, allow me to, in behalf of the Climate Change Commission, to express our gratitude and felicitation. Actually, we're so thrilled and we're so excited about this program because GenZero, really, I can say that you walk the talk. Overcoming paralysis is doing, learning by doing. And if I may, I will be announcing that we will be doing, together with GenZero, our company in the Philippines, ACEN, of course, the Singaporean government, with your president and our president, we have the MOU. And we will be doing the first ever market-driven transition for the coal power plant to 146 megawatt. It will be the first in Southeast Asia, in Asia, and perhaps it will be replicated. It can be replicated for the whole global standard. On our part, at the Climate Change Commission, we are now preparing. We have the green jobs. We are finalizing the implementations so that the necessary investment will be given the necessary privileges insofar as all the importations for the green just transition, orderly transitions, including the seminars, training, retraining, retooling, including our much-needed human resources. We call it ITL. It will be impactful, transformative, and inclusive we see to it that no one is left behind. So on the perspective of a policymaker, the governing board, the commission, we welcome this great opportunity, even if we only emit 1/3 of 1%, and we are considered to be the most vulnerable country for 3 years by the World Risk Index, at least with the help of the Singaporean government, GenZero, we are doing our responsibility as a responsible nation.
No, thank you very much, Commissioner. And I think it is important that you were mentioning also the creation of new jobs that are associated with this transition. So some studies have suggested that even in Southeast Asia alone, by 2030, we could be getting somewhere between 13 to 30 million new jobs associated with the green economy on all fronts. And I think it's about uplifting lives, not just about creating clean energy, but about creating value for our peoples.
Exactly. As what I told you before, you're one of the most famous personalities now in the Philippines, especially because your name is all over the news. So there are a lot of coal power plants, small and big. They're asking me that I am attending here. So that's why we're so excited, and just do more business in the Philippines, and we see to it that we will be giving all the necessary support insofar as the government is concerned and insofar as the Commission is concerned.
No, thank you very much, Commissioner. So I think the Philippines has provided, I think, a very interesting environment for us to actually consider our investments because it has the enabling conditions, right? I mean, a real commitment towards phasing out coal, the interconnectedness between all your major island groups, and also business communities in the Philippines are serious about this transition. So maybe now I turn to Eric. So obviously, as we will look at different countries and partners in Southeast Asia, we found a great partner in the form of ACEN that is actually committed to this transition. Now, obviously, you are in the power business for a long time. Maybe you could share with us a little bit around why a traditional power player established in a country that is still developing and have growing energy needs to think about energy transition and why you are doing this.
Yes, well, first of all, for those who don't know, ACEN is the energy platform of the Ayala Group, who really is a champion for sustainability. And we're also a publicly listed company. And 5 years ago, when we decided to shift away from coal and focus on renewables as our core business, we also have ESG-oriented investors who, on the one hand, one part of them would say, that's a great move to shift into renewables, continue what you're doing. But we had more astute or strict ESG investors who said, by divesting your coal plants, aren't you passing the problem to somebody else? And that gave us a pause. It is a valid statement. But long story short, we thought that when the Asian Development Bank started to push the notion of energy transition mechanism, ETM, which is not to be confused with transition credits, that was an aha moment for us, and we said, right, this is a great mechanism where if we retire our coal plant early, we will get financing to be reinvested and enable more renewable projects, right? So we did the economics, the business case to the board, and they supported it, and we're thankful, and we closed the world's first market-based energy transition mechanism in 2022, which entailed the early retirement of the 246 megawatt coal plant by 2040 after 25 years of operations. Now, on the other hand, the ADB and some of our investors are saying, but 2040 is too late. It already avoided, potentially reduced, up to 50 million tons because coal plants typically last for 50 years of technical life. We're already cutting it into half, right? But we tried to hear the reason for that, and it's because for the world to get to the 1.5 degree target, we need to cut our emissions from coal by half between 2022 and 2030, and it's a daunting challenge. And while Commissioner Albert is very right in terms of saying that we only emit 1/3 of 1%, it's no excuse to do nothing, right? So we thought, while it is economically challenging for us to accelerate a more ambitious retirement of the coal plant from 2040 to 2030, which sounds crazy, we kept an open mind and said, okay, we built in an optionality in our divestment, allowing ACEN to repurchase the coal plant as early as 2030, just in case the right mechanism arrived. And lo and behold, on the other side of the world, my good friend Joe Curtin here was thinking the same thing, because when we looked around, they said, my insight back then was the only way we can do a further acceleration of the retirement of a coal plant and head towards a renewable future is through carbon credits that reward early coal plant and just transition initiatives, but there was none until today officially, right? That's why it's a great milestone today, yes, finally, but this was thanks to 3CI, Rockefeller Foundation, and MAS. It was our wish granted, such that in July of 2023, 9 months after we completed the ETM, MAS and Rockefeller Foundation made this big announcement on transition credits. And we got so excited, and it didn't take long for us to sign a cooperation agreement in COP28 in December 2023. And now, lo and behold, we have the world's pilot project for transition credits. And so we're excited that we can potentially advance that timeline by 10 years and helping reduce up to 19 million tons of emissions over those 10 years. It's meaningful, but it's not about this particular project, but our aspiration here really is to make it a proof of concept, yes, so that this will be replicable and scalable, not only in the Philippines, but globally.
Indeed, thanks, Eric. And indeed, it is because it is potentially scalable and it has legs. I think that will also generate a lot more interest, not just within the Philippines, from Singapore, but also more broadly in the region. So if I can just turn to Shin for a quick moment, and just maybe you can share with us from the Mitsubishi Diamond Generating Asia perspective. You have also been in the power business. So why is Mitsubishi, why is Diamond Generating Asia right now thinking about this pivot into clean energy?
Yeah, thanks, Fred. Let me briefly introduce who we are. Diamond Generating Asia is not a mining company. It's we are engaging the power business in Middle East, Asia, and Australia. And then our parent company, Mitsubishi Corporation, announced a roadmap for a carbon neutral society toward 2050s. And then we are, of course, as a part of the Mitsubishi Group, we are involved in this commitment. And then we are committed to fulfill this responsibility by providing stable power supplies while creating the renewable powers. So to achieve these responsibilities, we think that there are 3 challenges. One is, of course, that to achieve the decarbonization and also economic growth, and also the providing a stable power supplies simultaneously. And then we thought that this transition credit scheme can solve these responsibilities and then to achieve. This is not just for retiring the coal-fired plant earlier, but it's for enhancing and also empowering the renewable energy supplies, which can provide the equivalent volume of the power which coal-fired plant used to provide. So we thought that this scheme is really scalable and also repeatable, not only in Philippines, but also the outside of Philippines and all over the world.
Indeed. And as I think the cost curves come down on renewables, it's also becoming a little bit more cost effective to do this and to avoid the fact that relying on legacy projects might also lead to stranded assets in time to come. But we still need that transition because obviously the assets are already plonked on the ground, right? The coal plants are there. So there is a need to be able to create the right economic incentives to actually transition early. And that's the point. So maybe now I turn to Joe. Today, Mandy had a very important announcement. Although she did it in a characteristically calm and manner, but it is actually a momentous and important announcement about the first methodology in place now to actually facilitate using transition credits to drive financing in to accelerate coal phase out. Maybe you can share with us a little bit around the methodology development, what it's about, what are some of the key features of this methodology since Rockefeller has been heavily involved in the development of this methodology alongside South Pole, Rocky Mountain, and others. And more importantly, I've got a question that came in that I think it would also be very suitable for you to address, and that is
a lot of questions.
A lot, right? And that is that a question around captive coal. Mm-hmm. And that is what is actually driving a lot of expansion of coal here, and would the methodologies actually apply to that? Maybe you could take a start to introduce us to this methodology.
Sure, well, maybe I should start at the end then. The methodology doesn't currently cater for captive coal plants. However, this is an opportunity we're looking at. We have, our first methodology is for grid-connected coal plants and caters specifically to that market. But in a way, if you think about captive coal, at least you don't have to deal with the issue of leakage. So in theory, it should be possible to develop a methodology for captive coal. And we've actually just begun to scope out, you know, a sort of preliminary study which would give us a go, no-go sense of direction about whether we should invest some time and energy in terms of developing a captive coal methodology. We know that there are some projects out there looking for this kind of methodology, so we do think it's an interesting opportunity. But maybe winding back, first of all, you know, many of you may be wondering, why is the Rockefeller Foundation doing this work? And I suppose that at the core of it is we believe that everyone deserves a future of opportunity, whether that's access to good jobs, good health, or access to affordable and reliable electricity. And more this means transitioning to clean energy, because clean energy can serve economic and development objectives. And when it comes to our work in Asia, obviously Asia is dominated by coal, as Nat said. And so really, if you're working on the energy transition, you really need to be focused on coal. And we know from a lot of real-world data from projects that we're working on across the region that the coal to clean transition increasingly does make sense. You know, solar PV and battery storage in particular can provide clean and dispatchable power and can provide grid reliability and affordability. And if you think about power system development, if you talk to any power system planner in the region, what they'll tell you is that affordability and reliability, those are the things that drive investment decisions. And we think that, you know, clean power can do the job. However, as we've heard already, coal is locked in. It's locked in by long-term contracts. 90% of coal plants in the region have a long-term PPA. The average age of a coal plant is 15 years. You know, you add it up, that's tens of billions of tons of carbon emissions that are locked in. So we need a new solution, and you know, we came up with this idea of transition credits. It seemed obvious to us, quite naive perhaps, but it seemed obvious to us that if you close a coal plant early, you replace that lost capacity with clean power, and you do it in a way that can drive benefits for the local community and you know, economic development, that you should be eligible for transition credits. But this wasn't possible 3 years ago, so we set out on this journey to develop this methodology. It was a very transparent, inclusive process. It was expert-driven, as you mentioned. I think we hosted 7 public consultations in total. So in terms of some of the aspects of the methodology, I mean, first of all, there's very strict inclusion and exclusion criteria. So this methodology is not suitable for all coal plants. It's only suitable for coal plants that shouldn't be closing for some other reason. You know, the coal plants in question, they need to have a long-term PPA. If you think about one of the problems in carbon markets, it's establishing the counterfactual scenario. What would have happened if we didn't do this? Well, when you've got a legally binding contract in place, that counterfactual scenario is a little bit easier to establish. We think we've been very conservative in terms of how we set the baseline, in terms of how emissions leakage is calculated. But at the same time, I think, you know, today is a hugely important milestone, but we need to be open, we need to be flexible. There is a need for some learning by doing. Power systems are very different across the region. They all have their own idiosyncrasies. So I think we want to be open, we want to be flexible. This is going to take some learning by doing. I think one important step is core carbon principle approval. There are a lot of transition credit methodologies being developed. We think that every methodology should go through the ICVCM core carbon principle approval process. That's why we're also proud to support a continuous improvement work program in ICVCM on transition credits, because we think that this integrity issue is going to be to make or break this new sector.
So Joe, what you're saying is not every single coal plant will be eligible for transition credits. You have got to prove the additionality. You've got to make sure that there are mechanisms in place to guard against leakage, which is essentially the requirement to have replacement clean energy capacity, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and how much clean energy replacement capacity is required under the methodology?
Well, we wanted to leave as much flexibility as we could because, as I said, markets are very different. So, for example, in the Indonesian market, you've got a lot of baseload capacity. You've probably got overcapacity. And so what we said in the methodology was a minimum 40% threshold for the paired renewable electricity. However, there's a very strong incentive built into the methodology. The more renewables you build, the more credits you get. Because if you think about it, if you rely on grid electricity to replace the coal electricity, the delta is very small in most grids in Asia, because most grids in Asia are so coal dominated. So if you really want to drive carbon credit and a sort of a significant delta, you need to build a lot of renewable capacity. And that's why a good idea needs a visionary leader. And when we had this idea, Eric was that visionary leader, and his initiative and the project that you're proposing, I think, goes well beyond the minimum threshold set in our methodology. So I think you're proposing 100% replacement of the lost capacity plus battery storage, so that it can provide that sort of same peak evening load, that dispatchable power.
But Joe, just to be clear, the methodology therefore is saying that you are only going to be able to issue transition credits for the delta. So even after you cross the minimum threshold of clean energy replacement, if you don't replace it 100%, then you can only credit for the delta, right?
Yeah, in simple terms.
Yeah.
A little bit more complicated than that, but
yes, of course. We've got to simplify it for the audience. And Eric, one of the questions that came up here is really that nowadays coal is not necessarily the cheapest form of energy, right? Available. If you take just the power generation component.
That's debatable, but yeah.
Debatable. So in fact, it is precisely because it's debatable. So therefore, because the question is really, if shutting down coal is already economically the sensible thing to do, why would credits be needed? Maybe you can explain the cost structure of this entire project and to explain where transition credits will help.
Yes, so the coal in the Philippines roughly is about 9 to 10 US cents per kilowatt hour, roughly. Okay, that's the cost, levelized cost of electricity. Solar, on the other hand, depending on the project, is probably around 9 US cents, 8 to 10 US cents. So in India, it's like 3 US cents per kilowatt hour because it's different context. Cheaper land, flat, big, etc. Right? Now, so based on those data points alone, people generally make a generalization that solar is cheaper than coal. Yes and no, right? When the sun is shining, yes, it's cheaper than coal. But that's an unfair comparison. It's not as reliable. It puts a strain on the grid, right? And the customers won't like it if you only have solar. You will have not power. You won't have any power at night. So a more fair comparison is you need to make it reliable, dispatchable, right? And therefore, you need to incorporate battery storage, right? And therefore, if you did that at battery prices today, and it goes down through time, is probably around 13, 14 US cents per kilowatt hour. That's the impact of battery storage. There's also the impact if you build large-scale solar to replace coal. There is some diseconomies of scale to a certain extent because then you'll go to a higher transmission line that entails large infrastructure investment. Civil works. In the Philippines, unlike India, we have to be creative with land, right? We don't have large flat land and we have to avoid forest, right? So we'll have to build on infrastructure to make sure that we have soil protection and so forth, and civil works and so forth. I'm not gonna bore you with the details. Gas, on the other hand, is already, at today's prices, relatively more expensive than integrated solar and renewables. But what we're replacing is coal, and therefore we still need subsidies. So part of the transition credits will go to subsidize that roughly 30-ish% differential because the system and the customers need to be kept whole. The other half or so of the proceeds from the transition credits will also go to the just transition of the coal plant. If you're shutting down a coal plant, which is perfectly healthy, which have 10 years to go, you should replace the foregone cash flows of that and keep the investors, bankers whole, as well as the community and workers. And that can only be enabled through transition credits.
Eric, just a very quick one. There is some interest in the audience to understand roughly what kind of pricing are we talking about for these transition credits?
It's very affordable, Nat. Well, we're anchoring, because we're not going to compromise on quality, right? We want to make sure that Philippines, which has a very tight supply situation, we don't want to worsen that. We want to replace it with a reliable and affordable energy. and that has some cost implications. So we're fortunate that we have Singapore to establish. We were anchoring the economics of this project on Singapore carbon tax pricing, which we all know is going to be in the 50 to 80 Sing dollars, or about 36 to 60 US dollars per ton in the 2030s. Yep. So hopefully we would end up in the lower end, not higher end of that range. But that is also a function, and since we have a policymaker government with us, that will also be a function, Commissioner, of what the tax and tax equivalent or the leakages are that will be imposed by the government. Hopefully it won't be so prohibitive or significant that we price ourselves out of the market.
Indeed so. And I think to the extent that some of the credits might come with corresponding adjustments, it would be suitable for Singapore's compliance framework tax regime. But to the extent that some of that may not need to come with corresponding adjustments, then it will actually go towards helping the Philippines NDC, because it will not be debited off the account. So Commissioner, if you can just tell us, as we scale up more and more of these projects, how would you actually think about Philippines' approach to actually keeping some of these benefits for the Philippines as well?
Yes, exactly. For the Philippines, we have 72.33 conditional NDC. And we have, as a policy, we have the Renewable Energy Act. Together with it, we have the Green Jobs.
Yes.
And we are still, we have EVOS,
yes.
one-stop.
Yep.
Way of one-stop shop way of permitting process.
Yes.
And we will be still giving additional benefits, incentives, and we do a lot of support for all this kind of green investment. But having said that, after discussing all this business scenario, let me look into, just to balance the stage, the missionary type of what we're doing. All of this, if we will borrow the word of the IPCC, if we will not decarbonize, everything is catastrophic.
Yes.
Anything that we earn as a business entity by 2030 or 2050, if we breach 2 degrees, then it will be catastrophic according to the IPCC. That is why, as a global community, again, we think GenZero, we think Singapore, we think ACEN, that we were able to have a market-driven contract wherein business people are willing to do it.
Yes.
Not only for money, but for mission.
Indeed. And I think when we think about this, obviously, demand becomes very important for the transition credits. To the extent that there is corporate demand that is voluntary, then that could potentially help the Philippines to achieve its climate ambitions because then it doesn't need to come with corresponding adjustments. So if I may just quickly turn to Nat and then say, could you tell us around the Kinetic Coalition, what is the appetite?
Sure. So really pleased, and I think we have, I've talked to the organizers into letting me put up a slide just to show the Kinetic Coalition, what we're launching just now, and we're going to be adding more and more to the slide, to the site, but you can find it at kineticcoalition.org. So they've just allowed me to do a little brief slide. But
we give you a clap.
what we're doing, thank you. So what we're doing is bringing together buyers and sellers of these high integrity energy transition credits. On the buyer side, we've got 20 plus companies. These are top tier multinational companies, McDonald's, PepsiCo, Amazon, others like that, MasterCard. We're bringing them together to consider a range of possibilities where there are sellers, whether it's asset owners or countries that need catalytic capital. So these companies are saying, hey, we want to be part of this journey. We want to understand what the possibilities are for energy transition credits. And they're doing it because they want to reduce emissions from the power sector in their value chains, right? So these are, if you go back and think about what Mark Kimber and others have said, these are companies with big scope 3 emissions. Their suppliers are operating in the Philippines, in Dominican Republic, in Chile, and all over the world. And they're drawing electricity from the grid. And so the most effective way they can help reduce emissions in their scope 3 is by directly addressing the systems that are producing energy in their value chains. So they're interested in investing in clean energy systems, in the kind of reliable, affordable, clean energy that Joe talked about. And they can help provide, by making advanced market commitments, they can help provide some of the upfront, or some of the eventual capital that can help drive upfront investment into the things that will reduce emissions. The early retirement of coal plants, the replacement with renewables, as we were hearing from Eric, and potentially other system-wide approaches. So we're eager to bring this group of buyers. We're working with Rockefeller as well, so we're bringing this group to the ACEN transaction, and super excited about Vera's announcement today, because that allows us to tell our companies, hey, we have this methodology that's been approved by one of the top standard setters. Everything we do will need to pass the core carbon principles of ICVCM, but we feel confident that with Vera behind it. So that's what we're doing, and we're really, really excited about the approach.
So Nat, with the Kinetic Coalition, we know that there are definitely some of these high-quality buyers in the world that would want to facilitate this early transition. But if I can just turn to Suzuki-san now and just say, look, so we know that the customers will have some demand, but are the project owners, the asset managers, the governments and all that around the region thinking in the same way like in the Philippines, where they are leaning forward? As you are developing projects in a region, what are you seeing? Is there this momentum towards clean energy projects rather than fossil fuel projects?
I think that, to be frank, I think that in Southeast Asia, to boost the economies, that I think that the stable energy supplies, which used to be mainly provided by the coal-fired plant, is still important. But of course, that transition is getting more important and important. So I think that not only in Philippines, but also the other countries in Southeast Asia, such a movement is really necessary. And then for the decarbonization, I think that earlier is better. I think, yes.
Indeed so. Now, one aspect, I think that there are some questions that have come up in the audience that is actually addressing this issue of just transition, and I think I want to close with that. Because at the end of the day, we are doing this not just because of the economics of this, but because it's going to really uplift lives and improve our communities. So actually, if you can all perhaps just share with me your perspective on what it would take to ensure a just transition, and maybe I'll just go down from Nat, then back down to Joe, because you are the ultimate holder of the pen when it comes to the methodological requirements. But Nat, maybe what do you think about just transition?
So first of all, just transition is at the heart of what we're trying to do in Kinetic. And I should say, I mentioned the Vera methodology, which we're super excited about. I see Mary Grady in the front row. There's also Mary and her team at Environmental Resources Trust are also developing a methodology that takes a system-wide approach. And we're considering that one as well in other contexts. And regardless of which methodology, and they're going to vary depending on the country and the project, what's appropriate. But I think regardless of which methodology we take on or which kind of credits, they've got to be high integrity, and they've got to be funding the just transition. I mean, one of the things, I think Eric said it really well, but when we think from a finance point of view, right, and there was the question earlier, well, why do you need carbon credits? Well, one reason you need carbon credits is because you need to be able to finance that transition, which is not generating new income, it's just helping communities that have been dependent on fossil assets make that transition to a new energy system. And so that's going to require additional finance, and that's one really important way that carbon credits can come in. So it has to be at the center of how we think about energy transition credits.
Thanks, Nat. Shin, what do you think?
I think, because that we could achieve perfectly the carbon neutral societies. It takes time. That is why we really need the innovative way for the transitions until we can get the perfect solutions. So I think that this transition credit can help us to enhance the renewable energies. So I think that this innovative way of the transition is really important for us. So I really assuming that and hoping to success this scheme.
Thanks a lot, Shin. Commissioner?
Yes, for the just transition, we have to maximize the socio-economic opportunities, and we need to minimize the socio-economic risk. At the same time, we have to listen and to allow our community, together with the green jobs of the workers, to participate in the policy making, including the internal way, and they need to understand. They need to be able to learn it by means of doing it.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Eric, very quickly.
Fred, we're in the business of renewable energy, which is inherently embedded in the communities where we operate. And so it is integral in our business model to be one with our community. There is a special bond, and we want what's best for the community. So similarly, if and when we do this transition, there's no question it has to be just. We cannot leave anyone behind. In the same way that we entered, when we do the transition, we have to make sure that the community is no worse off than if we were there. That is the underlying principle that we will follow. Of course, there's a methodology to comply with, but as with many aspects of the methodology, we always strive to go well beyond that and in accordance with our core principles.
Thanks a lot, Eric. And Joe, final word.
Yeah, I mean, obviously from a Rockefeller Foundation perspective, everything we do is about the just transition. It's about creating opportunity, not taking away opportunity. And so the just transition is central to us. It has been central to the methodology. It's not an afterthought. It's a central component to the methodology. If your project doesn't demonstrate that you are going to take the just transition and put it very centrally, in terms of local benefit, in terms of the local community, in terms of the workforce inside and outside defense, your project will not be eligible under this methodology. If you don't report and actually implement that just transition, you will not receive carbon credits. So no just transition, no carbon credits.
No, thank you very much. And I think this has been a very interesting panel in terms of teaching us a little bit more around the business and the policy considerations behind why and how we are going to be doing this coal transition. We certainly have touched on different considerations, whether there is actually demand for these transition credits, what it would take to have integrity in these transition credits, what are the social and community considerations, and more importantly, the fact that actually a just transition focused on the community and the well-being of our peoples is at the core of why we are doing this. So with that, please join me in thanking our panelists.